Good day. I am Elbert C. ATILANO Jr. from the College of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences of Zamboanga Peninsula Polytechnic State University. Today, I will be presenting my study entitled Governance and Performance of Sports Programs at Zamboanga Peninsula Polytechnic State University, a descriptive correlational study. This study examines how governance, policy implementation, and service delivery relate to the perceived performance of sports programs in ZPPSU using a quantitative approach. Sports programs in state universities and colleges function as publicly funded services that support student development, institutional representation, and stakeholder engagement. As part of public service delivery, these programs are expected to operate under systems of governance, coordination, accountability, and effective service delivery. In this study, performance is viewed not only through competition outcomes, but also through service quality and stakeholder experience. This perspective allows the study to examine how governance, policy implementation, and service delivery relate to the perceived performance of sports programs within ZPPSU. This study focuses on Zamboanga Peninsula Polytechnic State University, or ZPPSU, as the institutional setting of the research. As a state university operating under the supervision of the Commission on Higher Education, ZPPSU provides organized sports programs that support student development and institutional representation. Like many public institutions, sports programs in the university operate within administrative and resource-related limitations that influence governance, implementation, and service delivery. This study examines how these governance-related processes relate to the perceived performance of sports programs within the university setting. This study aims to examine the governance and performance of sports programs at ZPPSU. Specifically, it seeks to determine the level of governance, policy implementation, service delivery, and perceived performance. Examine the relationships among these variables, and identify which factors significantly influence perceived performance through regression analysis. These objectives guided the quantitative approach and the statistical methods used in the study, including descriptive statistics, correlation analysis, and multiple linear regression. Despite the presence of sports programs in many state universities and colleges, there are still limited empirical studies examining governance at the institutional level. Most existing studies focus primarily on participation and competition outcomes, rather than governance, implementation, and service delivery processes. This study addresses that gap by using measurable variables and statistical analysis to examine how governance, policy implementation, and service delivery relate to the perceived performance of sports programs within ZPPSU. This study aims to examine the governance and performance of sports programs at Zamboanga Peninsula Polytechnic State University using a quantitative approach. The study focuses on how governance, policy implementation, and service delivery relate to the perceived performance of sports programs within the university setting. Specifically, the study seeks to answer four major questions. First, it identifies the profile of the respondents in terms of their involvement in the sports program. Second, it determines the level of governance, policy implementation, service delivery, and perceived performance. Third, it examines whether significant relationships exist among these variables. Finally, it identifies which factors significantly influence perceived performance through regression analysis. This study is important because sports programs in state universities and colleges function as part of public service delivery systems. They are not only intended for athletic participation and competition, but also for student development, institutional representation, and stakeholder engagement. Within this context, governance plays a significant role in how sports programs are organized, implemented, and delivered. Effective governance influences coordination, accountability, policy execution, and the overall quality of services provided to student athletes and other stakeholders. The findings of this study are particularly important because they provide empirical evidence regarding the relationship among governance, policy implementation, service delivery, and performance. By identifying which factors directly influence performance, the study contributes to evidence-based decision-making in sports program management. More importantly, the study highlights the role of service delivery in achieving positive outcomes, suggesting that the effectiveness of sports programs depends not only on governance structures, but also on how services are actually delivered and experienced by stakeholders. This study utilized a descriptive correlational research design employing a quantitative approach. Data were gathered through a structured survey questionnaire administered to student athletes, coaches, and sports administrators using a 5-point Likert scale. The study focused on governance, policy implementation, and service delivery as independent variables, while perceived performance served as the dependent variable. SPSS was used for statistical analysis. Descriptive statistics determined the level of variables. Pearson correlation analysis examined significant relationships, and multiple linear regression identified which variables significantly influence perceived performance. The study was conducted at Zamboanga Peninsula Polytechnic State University, or ZPPSU, which served as the primary institutional setting of the research. As a state university operating within the public higher education system, ZPPSU provides organized sports programs that support student development, institutional representation, and athletic participation. The respondents of the study consisted of individuals directly involved in the university sports programs, including student athletes, coaches, and sports administrators. These participants were selected because they possessed direct experience and first-hand knowledge regarding the governance, implementation, and delivery of sports-related services within the institution. The study focuses on sports programs within the context of public higher education, where governance structures, administrative processes, and resource limitations influence program implementation and performance outcomes. This context is important because sports programs in public institutions operate under systems of accountability, coordination, and institutional regulation. By focusing on a single institutional setting, the study provides a more concentrated analysis of how governance-related variables influence sports program performance within ZPPSU. This study is anchored on the theory of New Public Governance, or NPG, which emphasizes collaboration, coordination, participation, and service delivery within public sector institutions. Unlike traditional public administration, which focuses mainly on hierarchy and control, New Public Governance highlights the importance of interconnected processes and stakeholder involvement in achieving effective public service outcomes. In the context of this study, sports programs are viewed as public service systems operating within a university environment. Governance, policy implementation, and service delivery are not treated as isolated processes, but as interconnected components that collectively influence program performance and stakeholder experience. New public governance is particularly relevant to this study because it explains how performance outcomes are achieved not only through formal governance structures, but also through coordination, communication, and the actual delivery of services to stakeholders. This perspective aligns with the study's findings, particularly the results showing that service delivery has the strongest direct influence on perceived performance. By using New Public Governance as the theoretical foundation, the study provides a framework for understanding how governance-related processes contribute to the effectiveness of sports programs within public higher education institutions such as ZPPSU. This slide presents the conceptual framework of the study. The framework identifies governance, policy implementation, and service delivery as the independent variables, while perceived performance serves as the dependent variable. The framework illustrates that governance, implementation, and service delivery are expected to influence the overall performance of sports programs. Governance refers to the systems of coordination, management, and organizational direction within the sports program. Policy implementation focuses on how policies, rules, and procedures are applied in actual practice. Service delivery refers to the provision of facilities, equipment, support services, and other operational resources experienced by stakeholders. Meanwhile, perceived performance reflects how respondents evaluate the effectiveness of sports programs in terms of outcomes, program delivery, and stakeholder experience. The framework also establishes the basis for the statistical analyses used in the study. Correlation analysis was utilized to determine whether significant relationships exist between the independent variables and performance, while regression analysis was used to identify which variables significantly influence perceived performance when analyzed collectively. This slide presents the profile of the respondents involved in the study. A total of 33 respondents participated, consisting primarily of student athletes, who comprise the majority of the sample. The remaining respondents include coaches and sports administrators directly involved in the university's sports programs. The respondents were selected because they possess first-hand experience regarding the governance, implementation, and delivery of sports-related services within ZPPSU. Their direct involvement makes their perceptions relevant in assessing the overall performance of sports programs. Most respondents also reported 1 to 2 years of involvement in sports programs, indicating that they have sufficient exposure to the operations, services, and management practices within the institution. The respondent profile is important because the study relies on perception-based quantitative data. Since the participants are directly engaged in the sports programs, their responses provide meaningful insights into how governance processes, implementation practices, service delivery, and performance are experienced within the university setting. This study utilized primary data gathered through a structured survey questionnaire administered using Google Forms. The questionnaire contained Likert scale items designed to measure respondents' perceptions regarding governance, policy implementation, service delivery, and perceived performance of sports programs. The use of a structured survey instrument allowed responses to be standardized and converted into numerical data suitable for statistical analysis. Since the study employed a quantitative approach, measurable responses were necessary to determine levels, relationships, and predictive influence among variables. The data gathered from the respondents served as the basis for the descriptive, correlation, and regression analyses conducted using SPSS. These analyses enabled the study to identify patterns, relationships, and significant predictors related to sports program performance. By using primary data directly collected from individuals involved in sports programs, the study ensured that the analysis reflected the actual perceptions and experiences of stakeholders within ZPPSU. This slide presents the statistical methods used in analyzing the data gathered in the study. The data were processed using the Statistical Package for the Social Sciences, or SPSS, which was utilized to organize, summarize, and analyze the numerical responses obtained from the survey questionnaire. The study first used descriptive statistics, particularly the mean and standard deviation, to determine the level of governance, policy implementation, service delivery, and perceived performance. The mean was used to identify the general perception of respondents, while the standard deviation measured the consistency or variation of responses. Reliability analysis using Cronbach's alpha was also conducted to determine the internal consistency of the survey instrument. This was necessary to ensure that the questionnaire items consistently measured the intended variables. A reliable instrument strengthens the credibility of the statistical results. To determine whether significant relationships exist among the variables, Pearson product moment correlation was used. This statistical method measures the strength and direction of relationships between variables. The resulting correlation coefficients showed very strong positive relationships, indicating that increases in governance, implementation, and service delivery are associated with higher perceived performance. Finally, multiple linear regression analysis was utilized to determine which variables significantly influence perceived performance when analyzed collectively. Regression analysis is important because correlation alone only shows relationships, while regression identifies predictive influence. The results revealed that although all variables are strongly related to performance, only service delivery significantly predicts perceived performance when the variables are tested together. This finding suggests that governance and policy implementation may influence performance indirectly through service delivery, highlighting the importance of actual operational delivery within sports programs. Ethical considerations were observed throughout the conduct of the study to ensure the protection of the respondents and the integrity of the research process. Participation in the study was entirely voluntary, and informed consent was obtained from all respondents prior to data collection. The purpose of the study, the nature of participation, and the use of the data were clearly explained to the participants before they answered the survey questionnaire. Confidentiality and anonymity were also maintained throughout the study. Respondents were not required to disclose sensitive personal information, and all responses were treated with strict confidentiality. The data gathered were used solely for academic and research purposes. The study also ensured that participation posed no physical, psychological, or social harm to the respondents. Since the study relied on perception-based survey responses, the level of risk to participants was minimal. In terms of limitations, the study was conducted within a single institutional setting, specifically ZPPSU, and involved a relatively small sample size of 33 respondents. Because of this, the findings are limited to the context of the university and may not fully represent all sports programs in other state universities and colleges. However, despite these limitations, the study still provides useful empirical insights into governance and performance within public sector sports programs. This slide presents an overview of the major findings of the study before discussing the detailed statistical results. The respondents are composed primarily of student athletes with varying levels of involvement in sports programs within the university. The descriptive analysis shows that governance, policy implementation, service delivery, and perceived performance are all rated high by the respondents. This indicates generally positive perceptions regarding the management and operation of sports programs in ZPPSU. The correlation analysis further reveals that all independent variables have very strong and statistically significant relationships with perceived performance. This means that higher levels of governance, implementation, and service delivery are associated with higher perceived performance of sports programs. Among these variables, service delivery shows the strongest relationship with performance. More importantly, the regression analysis demonstrates that although all variables are strongly related to performance, only service delivery significantly predicts perceived performance when the variables are analyzed collectively. This suggests that governance and policy implementation may influence performance indirectly through service delivery processes. Overall, the findings highlight the importance of actual operational delivery in achieving positive sports program outcomes within the university setting. This slide presents the results on the governance of sports programs in ZPPSU. The findings show that governance obtained a mean of 4.08 with a standard deviation of 1.29, which is interpreted as high. This indicates that respondents generally perceive the governance structures and management processes of sports programs positively. The high mean suggests that respondents believe there is effective coordination, organization, and administrative management within the sports program. In the context of public administration, governance refers not only to leadership, but also to how systems, policies, communication, and decision-making processes operate within the institution. The relatively high rating may also be influenced by the respondents' direct involvement in the sports programs. Since the participants include student athletes, coaches, and administrators, their perceptions are shaped by their actual experiences with program operations and institutional management. Although the results reflect positive perceptions of governance, It is important to note that descriptive statistics only indicate the level of perception. At this stage, the analysis does not yet determine whether governance directly influences performance. That relationship becomes clearer in the later correlation and regression analyses. This slide presents the results on policy implementation within the sports programs of ZPPSU. The findings show that policy implementation obtained a mean of 4.06, with a standard deviation of 1.30, which is interpreted as high. This indicates that respondents generally agree that policies, rules, and procedures related to sports programs are being implemented effectively within the institution. Policy implementation refers to how governance decisions and institutional policies are translated into actual practice. In the context of sports programs, this includes the consistent application of rules, schedules, procedures, and administrative processes that guide program operations and student participation. The high rating suggests that respondents perceive the implementation process as generally organized and functional. Since the respondents directly experience these processes, their perceptions reflect how policies are carried out in actual operations, rather than how they are written institutionally. However, similar to governance, the descriptive result only shows that respondents perceive implementation positively. It does not yet establish whether policy implementation independently affects performance. This becomes more important in the later regression analysis, where the individual influence of variables is examined collectively. This slide presents the results on service delivery within the sports programs of ZPPSU. The findings show that service delivery obtained a mean of 4.01 with a standard deviation of 1.34, which is also interpreted as high. This indicates that respondents generally agree that services related to sports programs are adequately delivered within the institution. Service delivery refers to the actual provision of operational support experienced by stakeholders. In this study, it includes facilities, equipment, administrative assistance, athlete support, and other services necessary for the functioning of sports programs. Unlike governance and policy implementation, which are more structural and procedural in nature, service delivery reflects the direct experience of respondents within the program. Although service delivery has the lowest mean among the variables, it still falls within the high category, indicating generally positive perceptions. However, this lower mean may suggest that respondents are more critical or observant of actual services, because these are the aspects they directly experience on a regular basis. This result becomes particularly important in the later statistical analyses because service delivery eventually emerges as the strongest relationship with performance and the only significant predictor in the regression analysis. This suggests that actual operational delivery plays the most direct role in shaping perceived sports program performance. This slide presents the results on the perceived performance of sports programs in ZPPSU. The findings show that performance obtained a mean of 4.05 with a standard deviation of 1.32, interpreted as high. This indicates that respondents generally perceive the sports programs as functioning effectively within the university. In this study, performance is viewed beyond competition outcomes alone. It includes perceptions regarding program effectiveness, quality of service, stakeholder experience, and the overall functioning of sports programs within the institution. This perspective aligns with the study's public administration framework, where performance is evaluated not only through outputs, but also through service quality and stakeholder satisfaction. The high mean suggests that respondents generally have positive experiences and perceptions regarding the outcomes of sports programs. Since performance is perception-based in this study, the findings reflect how stakeholders evaluate the effectiveness of the program based on their actual experiences within the university setting. At this stage, the descriptive statistics establish that respondents perceive performance positively. However, the next analyses become more important because they determine how governance, implementation, and service delivery are statistically related to performance, and which variable most strongly influences it. This slide presents the correlation analysis between the independent variables and perceived performance of sports programs. Pearson product moment correlation was used to determine the strength and direction of the relationships among governance, policy implementation, service delivery, and performance. The results show very strong positive relationships between all independent variables and perceived performance. Governance obtained a correlation coefficient of 0.976. Policy implementation obtained 0.979, and service delivery obtained the highest correlation coefficient of 0.987. All relationships are statistically significant with p-values of 0.00. These findings indicate that higher perceptions of governance, implementation, and service delivery are associated with higher perceived performance. The very high correlation coefficients also suggest that the variables are closely interconnected and operate together within sports program management. Among the variables, service delivery shows the strongest relationship with performance, possibly because it reflects the direct operational experience of stakeholders through facilities, support, and actual program services. This slide presents the results of the multiple linear regression analysis used to determine which variables significantly influence perceived performance when analyzed collectively. Unlike correlation analysis, regression identifies the unique predictive influence of each independent variable on performance. The regression model produced an R value of 0.989 and an R-squared value of 0.978, meaning that 97.8% of the variance in perceived performance is explained by the combined effects of governance, policy implementation, and service delivery. The model is statistically significant with a p-value of 0.00. However, when the variables were analyzed together, only service delivery emerged as a statistically significant predictor of performance, with a beta coefficient of 0.626 and a p-value of 0.00. Governance and policy implementation, although positively related to performance, were not statistically significant predictors in the regression model. This finding highlights the difference between relationship and predictive influence. While all variables are strongly related to performance, regression isolates their individual effects. The very high relationships among the independent variables suggest multicollinearity, meaning the variables overlap in what they explain about performance. As a result, service delivery captures most of the shared influence within the model, making it the strongest and only significant predictor of perceived performance. This slide presents the overall interpretation of the findings by integrating the descriptive, correlation, and regression results. The findings show that governance, policy implementation, and service delivery are all positively perceived and strongly related to perceived performance within the sports programs of ZPPSU. The correlation analysis suggests that these variables operate in an interconnected manner. Governance influences implementation, implementation affects operational processes, and service delivery shapes the direct experiences of stakeholders within the sports programs. However, the regression analysis provides a deeper interpretation by showing that only service delivery significantly predicts performance when all variables are analyzed collectively. This suggests that governance and implementation may influence performance indirectly through service delivery processes. The findings support the perspective of new public governance, which emphasizes that effective public sector outcomes are achieved not only through organizational structures and policies, but through the actual delivery of services experienced by stakeholders. Overall, the study highlights that effective service delivery plays the most direct role in achieving positive sports program performance within the university setting. Based on the findings of the study, it can be concluded that respondents generally have positive perceptions regarding governance, policy implementation, service delivery, and overall sports program performance in ZPPSU. All variables were also found to have very strong relationships with perceived performance. However, the regression analysis revealed that only service delivery significantly predicts performance when the variables are analyzed collectively. This suggests that governance and policy implementation may influence performance indirectly through service delivery processes. Overall, the study concludes that effective service delivery plays the most direct role in achieving positive sports program outcomes within public sector sports programs. Based on the findings of the study, it is recommended that ZPPSU continue strengthening service delivery through improved facilities, equipment, administrative support, and athlete-centered services, since service delivery emerged as the strongest predictor of performance. The university should also strengthen coordination between governance and implementation processes to ensure that institutional policies are effectively translated into actual operational practices. Regular monitoring and evaluation of sports programs are likewise recommended to support evidence-based decision-making and continuous program improvement. Finally, future studies may explore additional factors affecting sports program performance, including funding, leadership, organizational culture, and stakeholder participation.